You would have to say that Dan Ryan has probably the most powerful manifestation skills in the world.
Currently sitting in fifth, which I think was pretty safe to say a shock to pretty much everybody that
I'm
halfway through the
shocked.
season.
Georgia was actually going to set me up before any of you with this.
Yeah, so I was a bit cheeky. I was going to give you the question without notice of who would you put in your.
Kia ora Netball Scoop whānau, and welcome back to the Netball Scoop YouTube channel. My name is Toby Keddy, and in today's video, I'm actually joined by my podcast partner, Georgia Doyle, and we are doing our mid-season review of the SSN season. I mean, to think that we're already halfway through the season is crazy. It's flowing by, but the quality of netball has been amazing. And Georgia, what have your thoughts been so far?
Yeah, I think, like you said, crazy to think that we're halfway through the season already, 7 rounds down, only seven to go. We say this every year, pre-season drags on and on and on, and then all of a sudden the season starts, and it's like, holy wow, we're done already. So I think there's been plenty of teams that have got lots of performances they've put out to be really proud of, but then a few across the board that have probably got some work that they're looking to do in that back half of the season.
Yeah, I mean, while looking at some of the rounds for this video, I mean, to think of some of the teams that last season were so amazing and this season I feel have been very rocky starts or slowly building into it has made
Mm.
this season quite interesting in terms of results. So let's start off, I think, best to go with eighth place. I think we'll start from the bottom of the ladder and go our way up. So the Giants are in eighth place. So, Georgia, what are your thoughts so far about how the Giants have been this season?
Yeah, so I think the Giants, as we talked about in our preview video before the season started, didn't have a whole heap of change coming into this season. So it was probably always going to be an uphill battle for them, knowing that they finished with that wooden spoon last year, only made one change, which was Gina Crampton. She then fell pregnant, so that sort of left them a bit stuck in that sort of position. But I think one of the real positives they can take out of this year so far is Hope White, their young wing attack that they brought in to replace Gina. She's been fortunate and had a fair bit of court time so far this year, which is something else we know the Giants haven't always been super well known for. They've typically been quite stringent in the use of their bench. But I think this year is something that through, even if it's not necessarily through choice, they've certainly had to use their bench a little bit more. And I think one of the things I love about Hope is she's just come in, taken the game by the scruff of the neck a lot of the times and said, look, I'm young, I've got nothing to lose. I'm just going to put my best performances out on show. And she just adds that real sort of dynamic movement to the mid-court that we probably haven't seen for a while for the Giants. They've got someone like Maddie Hay, who's a really established, experienced player, but she likes to run those really long lines. And then once she finds herself on the circle, she tends to just sort of stop and prop there. Whereas Hope does a really good job coming off the circle, refeeding, repositioning herself so she can find her shooters. So I think she's certainly one that's put her hand up for a contract next year, whether that be staying with the Giants, depending on what Gina Crampton chooses to do once she's become a mum, or for any other teams that might be needing a little bit of extra punch in their midcourt.
Yeah, I think the Giants have been quite interesting in terms of obviously Jodie M. Ward was having a great season to start
Mm.
it off. I mean, last week we did have that ACL injury that has now happened, which yeah, we send our condolences to her. But there have been a few individual standouts. I guess as the collective, though, they have been struggling to break almost that mold we talked about in our preview, which is being predictable on attack. Also not necessarily giving a whole lot of opportunities to those young players early enough to make them feel confident to go out on court and perform. I think they've kind of almost thrown on some of these young players and hoping that they bring some sort of interesting spark. But yeah, it hasn't necessarily turned into those wins as of yet.
Yeah, and I think, on the back of that, as you've said, players haven't necessarily had that big lot of court time when they're young. They spend a lot of time on the bench, and that's a valuable learning experience. There's no doubt about that. But there's no better way to learn than actually getting out and experiencing it. And I think that sort of links to my second point about the Giants, which is one of the sort of negative aspects of their season, which is just their inconsistency. You can't expect these young players to come out and be able to play a complete 60 minutes if they're only getting thrown on in the last 5 minutes of the game, or they're getting 2 minutes here and then dragged off again. So I think we're seeing that the gap between the best Giants netball is so vast compared to their worst netball. And we've seen that in the fact that they were able to beat the Adelaide Thunderbirds, who were top of the ladder at the time when they played. But then the game the week just gone, they were out to a 6-1 or sorry, 7-1 deficit within the first sort of 5 or 6 minutes of the game against the Fever. So I think the more that they continue to invest in those young players, expose them to the game, I think it's probably fairly safe to say that their season's a bit of a write-off now. They're going to be really, really pushing to get any more further up the ladder, especially with that loss of Jodie Ward, like you mentioned, to that horrible knee injury. So now seems like the perfect opportunity. Let those young players out there, let them grind their way through games, think through it, and that's only going to set them up better for the future. So yeah, that's most of what's going on for the Giants this year. Toby, you were given the job of covering the Firebirds. Give us a bit of a breakdown of how they've gone so far this season.
Yeah, well, I think they had a really dynamic start. They had those two wins against the Giants and the Fever. Obviously, those teams, the Fever without Janelle, and then you had the Giants who are currently bottom of the ladder. But I think they were still really penetrating on attack. They had really good defensive pressure. But then it has been since round three, they've kind of been facing all the tough competition, those top four teams, and they have really struggled. And I think a lot of that has to do with the overall impact of their attacking end. I mean, Mary Chollock has been a great presence for them in there, and it has been a pretty consistent formula for netball over the last 15 years to have that really tall shooter that you can have an easy outlet to that can score the goals. But Mary has struggled with her shooting accuracy. I mean, she is one of the lowest in the competition in terms of shooting accuracy. She has the most rebounds, but it's basically rebounding herself. I mean, she has nearly, I think it's 15 or 20 more than her next person in the rebounds list for offensive rebounds. So she will really need to tidy that up if they want to be competitive for the rest of the season. Someone that I've been seeing as a major positive though has been Ruby Bakewell-Doran. I think she's really tenacious on defense. She's very rangy too, which I like, almost giving for the New Zealand fans like an Anna Harrison kind of vibe. Um, for her ability just to play in either goal defense or goalkeeper, bring something different, and also just use her athleticism and her long limbs to deflect, intercept ball, and has been really exciting so far.
Yeah, I think you've summed it up perfectly there. Charlotte came in and was sort of seen as someone that was potentially going to be this bit of a savior for the Firebirds, but they've
Mm,
had that same formula for a couple of years now. They had Romilda Aiken-George sitting at the back for so long, and she was a great key to their success for that such long period through the ANZ. And then she was there for a few years of the SSN. They dropped off a little bit, and then they brought Danelle Wallam in, had her for the last couple of years, who's that dynamic, tall holding shooter very similar to what we see from Mary Chollock, but obviously not quite as tall. So I think, yeah, to expect Mary to come in and be able to sort of save the day when she is quite a similar option to Wallam that they had there previously, I think was a tall order, no pun intended on that one.
mm.
But I certainly think that, yeah, the defenders have been a real shining light for them. Like you said, Ruby's work has just been fantastic. She's up there, I think, in pretty much all of those defensive stats and is just that real leader on court, which is obviously rewarded by the fact that she's one of their co-captains as well.
I think for them to progress throughout the rest of the season, I think they really need to solidify that goal attack position. I mean, they've had Emily Moore, they had Tipper Dawn, and Abigail Tumiafo go into that position, and not to disregard what their efforts have been, but it hasn't been impactful enough to be a massive presence or a massive draw away from what Mary Chollock is doing. I mean, you see the work that she did in the NSL, but also her work with the Uganda national team at the Quad Series last year. And she looked near unstoppable. And so to come into this competition, there was massive hype for what she was about to do. But I think a lot of teams have been able to kind of figure her out quite quickly. Even you saw that game against the Mavericks where Liv Lewis was on a blocking tirade. Um, Her shooting style is quite easy to read. Anyone with height can deflect it if they really time it well. And I think that game especially, I think there was like four or
Yeah, I
five or
think
something.
five is the number, yeah.
Yeah, it just kept going and going and going, which congrats to Liv for what she was doing. I mean, but I think people would have seen that game and gone, okay, well, here we go. We can time it, we can work it well. And yeah.
Yeah, they'll sort of take that as a bit of a blueprint of then how they can further dismantle the side. And I think another thing with the Firebirds is just their mid-court. They still haven't seemed to have figured out what their best combination is.
Mm.
They've got four really strong players in there, obviously having brought over Imogen Allison this year as well from the NSL. So I think with having four players who have typically been starting players over the last couple of years and trying to sort of squeeze them into those three starting spots. I think is something that they're still trying to figure out the best setup essentially that's going to give that ball to Mary in the best way they can.
Yeah, and now we'll move on to the Melbourne Mavericks in sixth place. I mean, Georgia, you had the pleasure of being able to analyze what they've done this season. So, kind of, what are your thoughts on how the Mavericks are doing?
Yeah, I mean, similar to what I said about the Firebirds, I think one of the big areas of something that still needs a bit of work for Mavericks is that mid-court. For in the preseason, we had Molly Jovic out for a fair portion, managing some injuries. She then came back within the first couple of weeks of the season starting. But similar to the Firebirds, they still don't seem to really know what their best three is in that mid-court across that wing defense center and wing attack position. And when they make changes, it doesn't necessarily seem to have the impact they're looking for. And I think one of the things that I've picked up on and watching on the broadcast is, well, we get that awesome insight from Fox in the timeouts of seeing what the coach is telling their players, and even sometimes we get a bit of footage of either half time, three-quarter time, quarter time, whatever it might be. And I acknowledge that a spray is often what a team needs to sort of rally and sort themselves out and get that sort of cracker up them to get them going. But there doesn't ever seem to be any sort of constructive feedback when those sprays are delivered. You'll see one from a team like the Swifts or the Vixens, and Bryony or someone will go out, deliver, 30 seconds of this is what you're doing wrong, be better, blah, 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 fire up. But then that last 60 seconds is okay, here's what you actually need to do to achieve that. And it's still adding that sort of value and that technical nous, I guess, to the timeouts, as opposed to just telling them they're all not doing very good. And I
Yeah.
think that's probably coming from a sense of frustration from the coaches because, from all accounts, they're training really well during the week. It's then just not executing on game day. So I can see how, as a coach, that would be incredibly frustrating, knowing that you've worked on all this stuff, knowing the potential that your team has got, and they're just not delivering. But it's also clear that just yelling at them isn't getting the job done either. So I think you need to sort of find that balance. And I think with coaches like Tracy and Richo, who are very loud, outgoing, big personalities, that sort of softness that you get from, like I said, someone like a Bryony or a Simone or even a Kiri, I think she's probably got the potential to have that sort of soft, tender side as well. You just don't really get that from either of them, which I think is starting to become a bit of an issue, since they're not seeming to sort out those issues that the coaches are obviously raising with the players.
Yeah, and I think the Mavericks have been quite interesting this season in terms of there have been some massive standouts, like Shimona Jock has been
Mm.
incredible. And then you also have like I really like what Amy Parmenter has done, to be honest, and at center as well. But that traditional position she's been doing it at wing defense has been really good work, strong, shutting down a very opposition. And, I think she's almost it looks like she's really invigorated for this season, and that she knows that this is a potential season for her to do really well and make that Diamonds environment again. So I've almost seen that passion through watching their games. Um, but yeah, who are some other potential standouts that you've seen this season?
Yes, I mean, Shimona Jock was the one that I'd flagged. I think, she was sort of fighting for that spot at the start of last year. And, she then came in and was battling for that court time at goal shooter with Eleanor Cardwell. But now that Cardwell's out with that injury and potentially up for a return in the last couple of weeks of the season, Jock has just taken that opportunity with both hands. And I
Mm,
think her connection with the mid quarters has definitely improved, regardless of which mid quarters are out there. And Jock's actually sitting second in the league at the moment for most goals scored behind Grace Mwecky. Although I think in the next couple of games, Janelle Fallon-Emard's due to overtake her since she obviously missed those couple of games, but that's still a
mm,
pretty impressive stat for Jock to be sitting up there. And another stat I found quite interesting when looking through the Mavericks numbers was they sit second for a stat that's called missed goal turnovers. So basically, if
mm,
they're missing a goal, more often than not, they're actually getting their own rebound or getting the ball back and not losing it. So even if the extra accuracy is off, which isn't often the case for Shimona, that tends to be more from the goal attacks they've had out there. As we know, Sasha Glasgow's still working her way back into form from that knee or from that leg injury last year. But most of the time, if the ball doesn't go through the ring, they're getting the ball back and giving themselves another bite at the cherry. So I think that's something that if they can keep that up and they're not losing ball in that way, it's going to just set them up in good stead for to continue that positive trend as the season goes on. So next up after the Mavericks is their fellow Victorian team, the Vixens, who are currently sitting in fifth, which I think was pretty safe to say a shock to pretty much everybody that
I'm
halfway through the
shocked.
season they haven't snuck their way up into the top four. So what's your assessment of their season so far?
Sorry to interrupt, but I'm shocked. And like, because I put them on the top of my leaderboard in our first preview for the season. I think they just looked so good at Team Girls Cup. And I mean, they have 5 Australian diamonds. They were in the final last year. And they, if they did a few things differently, of course, you can do a few things differently in every game. But if they did a few things differently during that grand final, they definitely could have won it. Um, I don't know. Like when watching their games, I was just almost confused why they were not doing the normal style that the Vixens have been doing while under Simone McInnes. I mean, they have had a pretty consistent style of a very fast speed of the ball, high offensive workload from all players, and really strong one-on-one defense. But that has not been clicking at all throughout this season so far. I mean, it's almost reminiscent of kind of the Diamonds during those th first 3 games against the Silver Ferns during the Con Cup. I mean, there was just something going on and no one could pinpoint it, but it was going on. And I think that's where the Vixens need to almost do a reset and go back to those basics and go, okay, we know we can win. We've got the talent to win. Let's figure out maybe some new structures or just going back to what worked last season and doing it better than what they're doing it now. I mean, it will be very disappointing for them knowing that Kira Austin and Sophie Garbin are both in the top 5 for turnovers, with Kira Austin currently leading with 53, which is 9 more than second place. And that's just not good enough. I mean, for the Diamonds goal circle having 84 turnovers between just the two of them, that is not good enough. After 7 games of netball, 84 turnovers not good enough. So they will really need to work on that shooter to shooter play, which they have been so known for over the last couple of years, and just make sure that it is the best pass thrown. They could pass it out back to Mundy or Maloney and work it back around. Like they don't need to force it in. And maybe that's what they are doing. But there have been some positives. I mean, they have the highest gain to goal percentage this season of 75%. They are the second highest team for 2 point shot percentage, which will always help them if they take more and more and more as the game goes on. Kate Maloney has the most pickups in the competition with 16. And someone I'd love to highlight is Kate Eddy. I mean, I think her ability to track her opposite player, plus a cut off their attacking lines have been great this season. And whenever she's gone into either wing defense or goal defense, I think she's been a very consistent highlight for them. Um, Someone that you don't normally would highlight, I guess, but I have every game I've seen so far of the Vixens this season, I've definitely come out of it thinking that they need some more Kate Eddy energy, which is that tenaciousness, and also just that ability to have hands over at consistently have hands over. So yeah.
Yeah, I think as we know, wing defense is one of the most underrated positions on the netball court, and I think Kate Eddy probably embodies that more than most because you've got Kate Maloney in centre, who gets lots of accolades, and then Joe Weston at goal defense, who's also very highly regarded. And sort of Keddy's just sitting in the middle, doing her thing, but she makes everyone else around her look good, which is the perfect job of a wing defense.
Hmm.
So yeah, I certainly think she's had a standout season this year, and I think seeing her shoot back into goal defense a bit more than we have in the past as well. As we know, with the Vixens not having Emily Mannix this year, there's been a bit of a sort of shuffle up in that goalkeeper position. We've seen Joe Weston back there a little bit. So I think when she's shifted into goal defense for a few games, that's also shown just how talented and how valuable she is for them.
Yeah, and my final thought just about the Vixens would be that I've really enjoyed this season that they're trusting their young players to come on a little bit more. I think, seeing Maggie Carris, seeing Lily Graham, and seeing, the team without one of their big stars on the court, like a Garvin or Austin or Maloney or Weston, when they're not performing. McInnes has had faith that her bench can come on and create some sort of spark, which back in last season or seasons before, she has not really trusted them to do so, even when they are losing. So that is a major positive, I think, that will help them as the season goes along, that the players will have confidence that they can come on court and make an impact.
Definitely. I think, yeah, Simone's typically been one of those coaches similar to Julie, who's not always gone to her bench when it's been needed, but it's nice to see that slowly changing. And I think the players are rewarding her when they get out on court as well. So that's always really good to see.
Uh, Wrap up about the Vixens. I mean, let's go into our top four for the season. And it is quite surprising that last week it was 1v2, and now the team that was in second place is now currently in fourth. We have the Sunshine Coast Lightning. So, Georgia Doyle, I mean, what are your thoughts on the Sunny Coast?
Yeah, I think as you said, just goes to show how dynamic the ladder is at the moment. And I always find it way more exciting through the season when the ladder's changing every week. I think that just makes every game more exciting. There's a bit more investment in the outcome of every game. But yeah, for the Lightning, I think one of the real positives from them this year has been probably not so much the first few weeks. The shooting circle took a bit of time to find its feet. But I think over the last few rounds, maybe with the exception of that Swifts game, the Lightning's shooting circle have done really well. We've seen Riley Batcheldor really come into her own this year. Over the last couple of seasons, since coming back from that ACL injury, she's typically been that player that's been injected at, the 3 minute mark of a quarter to then shoot some super shots, or she's been brought on maybe at the 7 or 6 minute mark to warm up and then do the super shots. That's sort of all she's been there for. And I know it was made public earlier in the year in the preseason. She went to Belinda at the start of the year and said, "What can I do to make myself more than just that player you put on in the super shot period?" And I
Mm,
think she's been and done that. We saw her get her first full 60 minutes up against the Vixens a couple of weeks ago. And she was phenomenal. She shot at 100% in the 1 point range. I think it was 41 goals from 41 attempts, which is a pretty impressive number to put up. And then we've seen her, because she's getting more game time in that regular period of the match, she's then warmed up and ready to go when that super shot rolls around. So she's not, there's not as much nervousness of putting that first long range shot up because she's coming off cold off the bench. She's been able to warm into the game and then shoot those long shots with ease. And then I think another positive that's still sort of on its way up is the super shots that Cara Conan's starting to put up. We obviously
mm.
there was a lot of talk around her at the start of the year and how, I think she said it herself that she's might be making herself redundant if she's not willing to take them. But I think she's come out and shown over the last couple of weeks that she's more than truly capable, which I think is something that we've always known. But because she's had the likes of Steph and Riley around her, it's been easy for her to just deflect, I guess, and make them take them. So I think the next step for her is going to be, the few times that she's taken them and nailed them was what it was, that Firebirds game where they were up by about 10 already. So if she missed them, didn't really matter. So, you're
Mm.
sort of going into them with nothing on the line. Then you had the Swifts game, they were down by about 15. So again, if you miss them, you're going to lose anyway. So I
Yeah.
think she's been able to nail them when the pressure hasn't necessarily been on. So the next step for her is going to be nailing them when there is that pressure. If we think back to that Fever game over in Perth, I can't remember what round it was. We had Steph on the bench in that final period. It was her and Riley out there on court. She lined up for one and it unfortunately didn't go in. So I think when she's under that pressure now, that's going to be the next step for her, is not only being able to shoot them when it, doesn't matter, for want of a better phrase, but being able to actually do it when the game's on the line or when the team needs her to step up.
Yeah, and I think even to look at their last week's game against the Swifts, it was like chaotic for them for the first, I don't know, 50 minutes of that game. They had no sense of being anywhere close to what the Swifts were doing. And then all of a sudden, that last 5 minutes of that fourth quarter, they were slotting them left, right,
It all
center,
just
everywhere.
clicked.
It was epic. And I mean, like, you could have even been like, well, they're going to win the game because all of a sudden they've cut down a lead of, in those double digits to all of a
Mm.
sudden they're like 6 goals, 8 goals differential. They have the ability to win these big games. And I think obviously that last 5 minutes showed that they could cut down any lead if they wanted to. But it's just being able to do that on a consistent basis has been the real struggle for them this season.
Yeah, and speaking of some other struggles, if we're looking at some of those more sort of in-depth stats that we get, Lightning, as we said, sitting fourth on the ladder, but at the moment they sit sixth for conversion of an opposition's unforced error. So if the
Mm,
opposition team maybe do a stepping call or fumble a ball that's not taken under pressure, they're only converting about 65% of those compared to someone like the Swifts, who as we know are sitting first. They're converting around 72% of those. So that's essentially ball you're being gifted by the opposition. You haven't had to do anything for it, and they're
mm.
not able to convert it to goal as much as they'd like to be. And then another stat that is talked about a lot in commentary in particular is that game to goal rate. So anytime your defenders are working hard and winning ball, whether that be through an intercept, a pressure built turnover like a held ball, something like that, they're sitting seventh at the moment for conversions of those gains. So that's not a very good spot for them to be sitting, considering they're in the top four. The number they're converting is about that 63%. So no doubt that's something that when you've got defenders of the caliber of a Courtney Bruce and Ash Irvin and Tara Hinchcliffe, they're players that are winning ball wherever they go. You need to be rewarding that because otherwise it just becomes demoralizing for the defenders. It gets to the point of like, well, why do I keep winning this ball if you're just going to throw it away at the other end? So I think both of those things are something that, particularly in the second half of the season, the team's really going to want to lift if they want to keep themselves in that top four. Because yeah, Vixens are only one win behind them at the moment, and I think at this stage that fourth spot is probably going to be a fight out between the Vixens and the Lightning, with potentially the Mavericks maybe sneaking up in there depending on how their season finishes out.
Awesome.
So that wraps up the Lightning chat. Next up, we've got sitting in third spot the Thunderbirds. What's your review of them so far, Toby?
What a strange season for the Thunderbirds. I mean, to think that they're coming off two premierships in a row, and now that they are, only in third place, which to them would feel like almost that they're not living up to their potential. Um, but that does make sense because there was a huge loss for them at the start of the season. Shamira Sterling-Humphrey has left the team because of a pregnancy. So trying to find a replacement that will be able to match such a huge name is, it's near impossible.
Mm.
So for them, I think, of course, their defensive effort has been what has saved them throughout this kind of period of trying to adjust. And that does come from the leadership of players like Matilda Garrett, but also who's having a stellar season is once again Latanya Wilson. Not only do the Thunderbirds as a collective have the most intercepts, most deflections, and most gains in the competition, Latanya is also the leader of all three stats too. So being able to play wing defense, goalkeeper, but also be able to shut down all of her oppositions has been a key thing for them this season. I think, the defensive effort has been such a massive part of why they have won those championships. So for them to be on top of all those stats still, even with the loss of a Shamira Sterling-Humphrey, I think is very impressive. And I think that just goes to show that even their younger core is still able to really penetrate and make sure that they can defeat any opposition they go up against. I think you even saw that in their loss against the Fever. It was that clash between Latanya and Janelle, and you could see that both players who are at the top of their games or one of the best in their positions, were looking at each other and being like, I'm going to give you 110% no matter what. And they were. And it was a great battle to watch. Just goes to show that, you cannot ever write off a Thunderbirds team. But something I have noticed is that they haven't been as punchy on attack this year. I think there seems to be a disconnect, whether it is that connection between Romelda and the mid quarters. But I think Romelda hasn't been strong on her takes as strong on her takes off the feed this year. I think Georgie Horgis while having some great games, has also, thank you to Ian for providing the stat, but has had the most intercepted passes this year. So her feed isn't going in as well as it has been, but it's also showing that she's becoming a little bit more predictable, I guess, because of those great accolades that she's had over the last couple of years and, making diamonds. She will really need to continue to add something different to her game or provide a new lead for them to make sure that they can be a consistent attacking threat.
Yeah, I think as you've said, when someone's at the top of their game for as long as they are, like Georgie Hodges has been the last few years, people are going to start working as hard as they can to figure them out. And I think the first time we probably saw that this year was when they played the Swifts with Shani
Yeah.
Lambden. So I think she's now given everybody that blueprint of, okay, this is how you beat Georgie. So now everybody else is coming along and trying as best as they can to emulate that. And then
Mm.
I think another player for the Thunderbirds that probably hasn't stepped up to the level as she has in previous seasons and is potentially a bit of that reason for the disconnect between the mid-court and the shooting end is Taylor Williams. We
Yeah.
certainly haven't seen as much of her on court this year. We've been seeing a fair bit more of Hannah Petty in centre, or if Williams is on court, she's often back in that wing defence now that they've obviously had to shift Wilson back to the defensive circle. So I think she's probably one of those players that, again, flies a little bit under the radar a lot of the time. It's just that workhorse. Everyone's always talking about Shamira, Latanya, Georgie, Romelda, that a lot of those other players that still play a really important role don't always get the accolades or the recognition that they deserve. So I certainly think that, yeah, she's one that since she hasn't had as strong a season as she had in the past, that's definitely affecting the flow through that attacking end that you mentioned. Next up is the team that have been sort of slowly building through the season. They've snuck their way from sort of resting at the bottom of the ladder for the first few weeks. Then, after the return of Janelle, have snuck themselves up to second, which is the West Coast Fever. What's been happening with them this year?
I mean, you would have to say that Dan Ryan has probably the most powerful manifestation skills in the world. Because that ability to bring back Janelle so soon has been such a drastic shift for them offensively. I mean, those first two games against the Swifts and the Firebirds, they were two teams that had fairly new combinations themselves, and they were making a lot of turnovers, but the Fever was still not able to either disrupt what they were doing or also penetrate through their defensive structures. I mean, they could never find Kumwenda or Wilkinson when they were in goal shoot, and I think Shanice was working overtime to try and create that space or almost draw the defender off the goal shooter to create a little bit more space to feed into them. Where I think now that Janelle is back, it's having that strong post player that draws the defense towards her and double teams where they've almost able to start with their normal attacking structure of having those three feeders um, and being able to have all that space to create new attacking structures or drive towards the post has been crucial for them. I think Janelle, of course, has had a near perfect start to her return. I mean, she's only played 5 games, but she's already fourth in the Nissan net points ladder. She currently averages the highest amount of net points per game too. So just having her back alone is going to win the Fever games. And I think her connection as well with Alice Tegneil has been crucial. She's currently second in the competition for assists and feeds. Um, and you saw her work with Wilkinson or Kumwenda. It was good, but it wasn't where it needed to be. And I think having Fowler Nimbard back has almost brought Tegneil back into the game.
Yeah, I think we saw it particularly in that Vixens game, which was the first one that Janelle
Mm,
came back and played. That was probably also the best defensive game the Fever had had all year. And I think just the confidence that having someone like a Janelle down at the end of the court would do for the team would be unreal. Defenders know that they can fly for ball, have a crack at everything, because more likely than not, it's going to then be rewarded at the other end. So it just lifts that whole team. So yeah, I think her returning has certainly been that pivotal point for the Fever. And as we've seen, yeah, they jumped from, I think they were probably sitting it would have been sixth or seventh on the ladder initially
hmm
after those first couple of games. And yeah, they've just gone up and up and up every week after that.
Yeah, and I think for me, as you mentioned, their defense has been very good. Um, I think, with the loss of the Ariang sisters, with Ruth gone for the season, but then Sunday also having that injury to begin the season, I think people were a little bit worried about what the Fever were going to put out there defensively with Katie Ann and Fran. But I think Katie Ann has had a very good start to the season. I mean, she's top five for deflections, and also she has the most deflections that have resulted in a gain this season. So to be on a stat that like that is going to, build your confidence, but also makes you a consistent threat for any opposition. She's very tall, really good movement this season too, and I think she's almost attacking the ball a little bit more as well with in the correct lines rather than attacking the ball and missing it completely. I think she's been a lot more consistent in what she's putting out there. But also the Fever have been the least penalized team in the competition. So which you wouldn't necessarily expect because watching their games, they're still a very physical team. But being able to be physical but not draw the umpire into what you're doing is going to keep you very much on top of your opposition or frustrating what they're doing. So yeah, fully commendable to the Fever defensive end as well. Now that we are now going to talk about, I'm super jealous of this, but the top of the ladder, to which they have been not necessarily dominating all opposition. I feel like they've had quite a few close games or games that they could have been a lot better, but they have been able to win all of their games this season, and that is the New South Wales Swifts. So, Georgia, what are your thoughts on the Swifts to start the season?
Yeah, well, I think as you said, yes, they are sitting undefeated, going 7 from 7 at the moment, but they haven't necessarily had it all their way. A lot of the games, it's been quite level for a lot of them. It's been level for 2 quarters. Then some have been level for three, and it's really just been 1 quarter where they've absolutely put the foot down and
Mm,
jumped out to a 5, 6, 7 goal lead that's then just almost scared off the other team. And has then been able to allow them to then dominate that bit further. Like we think back to the New South Wales derby from a couple of weeks ago. I think there was 2 goals in it at half time, which was top of the ladder versus bottom of the ladder. The Swifts then came out absolutely firing after that halftime break and then left the Giants in the dust for the rest of it. So I certainly think that yeah, it hasn't necessarily been all their way, but when push has come to shove, they've been able to get the job done every single time. Going to jump to one of the stats that you actually mentioned for the Fever, which was the fact that Fever are currently sitting second lowest for penalties. As we know, last year Swifts were, I'm not sure if they were the highest, but they were certainly up there in terms of the amount of penalties they were receiving from the umpires. And they made a big note of that being something they really wanted to address for this year. And they've done a really good job at it because they're currently sitting second lowest for the penalties. So I think that's certainly got something to do with having obviously Dylan Nexhip now as part of their coaching team. He's brought a lot of new defensive structures for them. And I think the inclusion of Shani Lambden has been key for them as well. I think Grace Nweke was obviously probably the marquee signing, not only for the Swifts, but for the whole of Super Netball coming into season 2025,
mm,
knowing what she was having to give up as well in terms of that New Zealand representation for this year. But I think Shani Lambden is certainly an unsung hero at the Swifts, as we said, is often the case for wing defences.
mm.
But her ability to just work the body of a wing attack, keep them off circle edge, block their vision into the circle for that feed to all those tool holding shooters that the competition has got. I think that's gone a really long way in being able to open up the opportunities for the likes of Clow and Tegan O'Shannessy and Maddie Turner to be able to then go out and hunt for ball of their own back. Whereas last year they were having to get all caught up in that physical tussle because they weren't necessarily getting that protection from their wing defence out the front. I think, as I mentioned before, Shani Lambden was probably the first person to really figure out Georgie Horgis. And then only last week she did another number on Liz Watson. So that's probably two of our most dominant wing attacks that we've got in the game at the moment. And she's been able to really disrupt their game, which just goes to show what sort of caliber of a player she is and makes it probably even more shocking that it's taken her this long to be able to get a full-time call up to one of the elite teams.
I mean, you can't talk about the Swifts without talking about. I think you're not going to know who I'm going to talk about here, actually.
No.
But in my head, I feel whenever I've watched their games this season, I've really enjoyed Tegan O'Shannessy. I mean, she has been like on another stratosphere, I think, this season in terms of her ability to, leave the circle and really understand the attacking lines and go for ball. I think she's really attacked ball this season. I think her height and either at goalkeeper or goal defense has been a massive plus for her game. And I think you've seen that her energy has almost reinvigorated Sarah Clow in the Swifts environment as well. I think whenever they work together, they are very strong as a combination. And having Shani there too, I think Shani is such a person that, you won't see it in the stats. Her NIS and net points isn't as high as some other wing defenses, but it's her ability to make sure that her wing attack opposition is not creating any sense of impact. And I think a lot of her competition has struggled to figure out what to do with her in this environment.
Yeah, definitely. I think, there's so many positives to talk about the Swifts, and it's hard to talk about them without then mentioning their shooting circle as well. I
Mm.
do promise it was randomly allocated. I didn't purposely not give you the Swifts to talk about. When it popped out, it just happened to be that way.
Uh,
But yeah, I mean, Grace and Helen have just formed such an iconic shooting combo. As we know, Helen's been one of the best goal attacks going around for the last couple of years, and we unfortunately weren't able to see the best of her last year based on all the circumstances that were surrounding the team.
Yeah.
So to be able to see her thrive again along someone like Noki, who still is so inexperienced, we
Mm.
the game over the weekend against the Lightning, she was getting frazzled by the Lightning defenders, and she admits that she wasn't happy with her own performance for letting the defenders get into her head. But that's what she came out to this competition to experience. She came out here to do the hard work, to play against the best in the world, and to learn how to come up and withstand that physical pressure that she always talks about getting when she's out on the international stage. So I think she's certainly been one who probably, unlike Mary Chollock, who had that big expectation coming in as well, but has probably struggled to stand up to the physicality more
Mm.
often than not. I think Grace has been a player who most of the time is able to stand up to it, and that probably helps with the players that she's surrounded by. You've got the likes of Paige Hadley and Helen Housby alongside her, both Australian Diamonds player or Australian Diamonds and England Roses players, versus someone like Mary who's got, Emily Moore and then either a Lara Dunkley or a Macy Gardner, and that's not to take anything away from them. But
Mm.
Hadley's one of the best mid-quarters we've got in the game. Helen is one of the best shooters we've got in the game. So just that support that Grace has around her compared to a player like Mary, I think probably goes a long way in why she's been able to cope with the transition to Super Netball a lot easier.
Yeah. So Netball Scoop Whānau, that is our analysis of the 8 teams so far this season. And to kind of spice things up a little bit, w- Georgia was actually going to set me up before any of you with this, but I ended up wanting to do a little fantasy team slash All-Star 7, I think we're going to call it, for the season so far. So in a way that I allowed you to pre-plan, what was your starting seven?
Yeah, so I was a bit cheeky. I was going to give you the question without notice of who would you put in your. I was going to be nice and at least give you 10 players.
Yeah.
But you've said no, let's do seven. So I've met you in the middle for that one.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'll start at goal shooter, go from the top down. I put Janelle Fallon-Emard there. I think the impact that she's had on the whole team, as we've mentioned before, once she had that comeback, I think it's hard to go past that. As you said, she's sitting, I think it was third overall for goals scored, and she's got two less
Mhm.
games behind her than everybody else. I think she's, certainly at this stage, the best goal shooter that we've seen over the last probably 10, 20 years. So I think you're hard pressed to find anyone else but her to put in there. Although I think you might have managed to find someone to put in there potentially. I'm not too
Yeah,
sure.
yeah, we'll see. We'll see.
Next, Helen Housby, as I've just mentioned, one of the best goal attacks in the game. Hard to go past her. And then another player I just talked about, Paige Hadley, as well. I think we mentioned a bit earlier that the Diamonds attacking end are in a bit of a shambles at the moment, particularly for the shooters. But
Yeah.
Paige is someone who, as ever, steady, safe with ball in hand, doesn't do silly errors with the ball, always there for her team. And I think she's really thriving, having that much more settled lineup and team environment around her last year compared to all the chaos that was going in Swift's land last year. Then centre was a slightly trickier one, but I've ended up putting youngster Lisa Maimai in there. Her second year at Super Netball, I think for Lightning, she has just really dominated that centre position. And I actually found a nice, interesting stat for her looking at number of turnovers versus minutes played to sort of see who's essentially making more turnovers or who's turning over the ball quicker. And at the moment, where are we? Lisa has 22 turnovers for 304 minutes of netball played. So essentially, she's committing one turnover every 14 minutes. If we compare that to some of the players that we talked about a little bit earlier who are a bit below par this season, we've got Kira Austin, who's committing one turnover every 7 minutes.
Mm.
Sophie Dwyer, who I don't think we've mentioned today, but her form has certainly been probably a bit below par of what she would be expecting. One turnover every 9 minutes. Steph Fretwell, one turnover every 10 minutes, and even Liz Watson is sitting with one turnover every 13 minutes. So they're either current or former Diamonds players who, yes, they do handle the ball a lot, but their experience, they should be keeping it safe. So I think for my to have a better stat in that sense, for that, I think is a pretty impressive showing for someone that's so young. Then defensive end is where I struggled a little bit more. I've put Shani Lambden in wing defense. As I spoke about earlier, I think she's the best at shutting down that connection between the wing attacks and the goal circle. Then goal defense goalkeeper was where I really struggled. So I ended up selecting Tara Hinchcliffe for goal
Yeah.
defense. I just think she has been one of the more consistent goal defenders across the year. But the other people I contemplated putting in there were Ruby Balquhidder, that we've already talked about earlier. And then you've got Latanya Wilson, who I just never know where to put her. She
Yeah.
needs to be in the team
I
somewhere.
know.
She
I
plays so well
struggled.
everywhere that you don't know where to put her. So she's then
Mm.
who I've shuffled back to goalkeeper. I think her ability to get up and contest that high ball, knowing that she's that bit shorter than a lot of the more traditional goalkeepers that we see at this stage in the game, meant I had to put her back there. While she probably hasn't played as many minutes as someone like a Tegan O'Shannessy or a Sarah Clow, I would have felt like I was committing some crime if I'd had a team of the year or team of the 7 weeks without her in there. So I decided to put her back at goalkeeper.
Awesome. Well, I feel like we've got quite a few similar, but I almost feel like in some positions I've slightly cheated. I've put them in different ways. But I'm gonna and fully well know no matter who New Zealander is going to be in the competition, if they're playing well, I was going to put them in. So not just a Grace stand, but a New Zealand stand as a whole. So my fantasy team, you can't start it off without my goal shooter, Grace Nweki. I think she's been such an impact for the Swifts. I mean, her her presence alone has almost just brought life into their attack end. And you've seen it, the Swifts have gone from, being near the bottom of the table last season to now undefeated. And they have only necessarily made two changes or three changes to their, traditional starting lineup. So Grace has been a massive impact there. And I think, she will continue to grow and grow this season. So she's also my predicted, I would say, goal shooter of the year as well. Goal attack, Helen Housby. I mean, that's pretty obvious. I think she's been amazing to start off the season. And I've also really liked how she's been more of a, shooting threat too. I think, it would be so easy for her just to hand it off to Grace every single minute and, be able to score goals. But I think she's kept herself in the game and she knows that in order for them to win, she needs to be a threat too. She can't just do it easy. So I really like that about her game. At wing attack, I put Alice Teagnell from the West Coast Fever. I think since Janelle's been back, who I know I should have put at goal shooter, but I think I think having her, she's really been brought to life over the last couple of weeks. Well, since Janelle's been back, so I've really liked what she's been doing there. My center is Paige Hadley. I know that she's been playing in between both wing attack and center, which is why I said I was kind of cheating, but um, I think Paige has been incredible this season, and I think she's almost obviously, if you watched our preview, I thought that Kate Maloney was going to kind of have a season that Paige Hadley's almost having. I think Paige has been very consistent, very low turnovers for her workload, and also she's being a defensive presence too when she's been put in that center position. My wing defense is Kate Eddy. I have thought that she's had a really good season, both at wing defense and goal defense, but I've just really thought that she needed to be mentioned. And I think when she's been at wing defense, it's just that hands over pressure and the ability to shut down her opposition has been crucial. And also, she has been quite understated in comparison to a Shani Lambden. I think being in that Swiss environment, Shani's almost been, hyped up a lot for her efforts. But I think, you've got to pinpoint those players that I think are bringing them through those games too. And I think Keddy has been one of the reasons why the Vixens have been able to get those couple of wins. My goal defense, I did toss up between Tara, but my who I chose was Ruby Bakewell-Doran. I've talked about it before. I've really liked her tenacious effort on defense. And also another stat I forgot to drop in before that she's had the most defensive rebounds this season. So being in that goal defense and having that kind of stat, especially over players that have, significant height advantages that should be able to block out players a lot easier than should. Um, I think she's been doing an incredible job, and we'll see if that stat still stands when she plays Janelle this week. So I'm not sure how likely that is, but we'll see how it goes. And at goalkeeper, I've gone for Latanya Wilson, and I think that is pretty obvious. And I think you've said a lot of the reasons why I think she should be in that goalkeeper position over being in either wing defense or goal defense.
Agreed. I think one of the things that Thunderbirds have finally done over the last couple of weeks is figure out where they're best suited. I think they initially shifted, Tilly Garrett back as well as the Tanya Wilson back, but I think keeping Tilly Garrett in that goal defence, who is another one who I contemplated putting in that bib as well.
Mm,
Yeah, shifting Wilson back, it means you're only moving one player out of position, and
yeah.
they're a lot more familiar with that Tilly Garrett in goal defence. And I think she also does such a great job at bringing the ball down the court as well, which I
Yes.
think we really noticed she was missing when she was sitting back at goalkeeper. So yeah, I think you couldn't have a team of the year or a team of the half year without her in there somewhere. It's just figuring out where to best put her, and I think goalkeeper is the best spot for her at the moment, and I think where she should end up playing out the rest of the season.
Well, thank you so much, Georgia, for joining me today. And thank you so much, Netball Scoop Whānau. If you have made it this long, please subscribe, comment down below. We would love to see what you guys think about our videos, so please comment. I always love reading those comments back when we do receive them. And then also please like them as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we will see you next time with a new video. Okay, bye now.
Bye.